Thank you all very much. Thank you. I'll make this really quick because I'm looking for those hot dogs. I know you are too, so we'll get rolling here. But I'm excited to share with you all a story tonight. There's something special about a story. A story can grab you in a unique way. A story can connect with you. A story can resonate and echo in your heart and your mind in a very unique way. And this story tonight that I'm going to share with you all is a story of purpose, a story of meaning, that I hope as I share it, you see yourself in it in some way. I'm going to take you back. I grew up down the street. I attended Highland Park High School, and from there I went off to USC. Don't worry, my parents didn't help me get in. So I was at USC just trying to find my way, trying to figure out what I was going to do through college, through the rest of my career, and I stumbled into journalism. I was an avid reader of the Dallas Morning News and devoured the sports section every morning before heading off to school. So I figured, why not go into something that I really enjoyed? And so I stumbled into journalism, and my first assignment as a journalism major was to write for the school newspaper. And so I go to the newspaper, and they say, hey, you need to cover women's volleyball. And I had never watched a women's volleyball match in my life. I had no idea how the scoring system works. So there I am on Wikipedia trying to study up on the scoring system. And I finally get my feet under me, and I go to my first match. And about a week later, the sports editor of the Daily Trojan, the student newspaper, calls and says, hey, we need a writer for the football team. Would you mind taking that? And before he could even finish asking the question, I was like, yes, I'm all in because I actually know how football works. So I go and I start covering the football team. And for the next 3 years, I got to go to every single home and away game. And this was about 15 years ago or so. And so this was the glory years of USC football. They went and won 34 consecutive games. They went to 3 straight national championship games. And I got to go along for the ride all along. I got to go to 2 Heisman Trophy ceremonies, 36 straight games, and this was my job in college. I was living a dream. I was so fortunate. I was gearing up to graduate. I realized that this is what I wanted to do for my career. I wanted to go on and be a sports writer for some newspaper somewhere, and was about to graduate. I needed to write one final story for the school newspaper. And in the springtime, right before graduation, there's not much going on with the football team at a college, so I was scouring the depths, just trying to figure out what am I going to write a story on, my last story for the Daily Trojan. And I see a little alert that said walk-on tryouts for the football team were coming up. I thought this was pretty cool, that they just do an open casting call for any student at USC can try out for the #1 team in the country. That's pretty cool. And so I started interviewing some guys that are going to go through this tryout, and I figured this is going to be a pretty cool story. Who are these guys that they don't get any attention? They're not on SportsCenter, they're on the cover of Sports Illustrated, but this would be a pretty cool story. And so I'm interviewing these guys, and in the process of interviewing the guys, it hits me, well, what if I go through the tryout myself? Kind of show first-person perspective, really bring people on the inside, and it'll be a little bit of a joke. I could kind of pull a little George Plimpton on them, and I was a student newspaper reporter. I was 160 pounds, and I was going out to the tryout just to write an article. And on top of that, the last time I played football was in 5th grade. So this was going to be a 100% total joke. So I go through the tryout, and I'm getting my butt kicked at the tryout. But there I am. This is the coolest story I could have ever imagined. I'm getting yelled at by Pete Carroll. All the assistant coaches there are yelling at me. And I'm running a 40-yard dash for the first time in my life, running 3-cone drill, running routes as a wide receiver. 2 hours, I had hit a gold mine for a story. This literally was the best story I could have ever asked for my last story for the Daily Trojan. So I go home that night, I'm starting to write my story, and I wake up the next morning, I get a phone call saying, hey, is this Ben Malcolmson? The lady on the other line is, and I'm like, yeah, of course. And she goes, you made the football team. Now, it never even crossed my mind that I could make the football team because this was the #1 team in the country. I was 160 pounds. I hadn't played football since 5th grade. I was going through the tryout just to write an article. And so I figured, okay, this has got to be a prank call. This has got to be a friend pulling a prank on me or something like that. And so I was like, okay, good joke, nice one. And the lady on the other end of the line goes, no, I work for the football team. You're on the list. You got to come check in. So it hits me right there in that moment that there were 41 guys at the tryout, 40 of them were trying to make the football team. There was one guy there not trying to make the football team, and that guy happened to make the team. So I hop on my bike, I pedal as fast as I can over to the football building, and I'm just so excited to see if this is actually legit, if this is real. And about halfway to the football building from where I was living, it hits me that Coach Pete Carroll, he was head coach of USC at the time, he's renowned for pulling pranks. I mean, you could go on YouTube right now and type in Pete Carroll prank, and you'll get a dozen pranks will come up. So of course, I'm gonna be the butt end of his latest prank. What better target than the student newspaper reporter who was going through the tryout for an article? I mean, what better target? So it hits me in that moment. I go from really excited to all of a sudden just down in the dumps, preparing to be just the butt end of his latest prank. I'm fully expecting to walk up to the football building, and there's gonna be Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell, and they're gonna point and laugh at me, and it's gonna be on YouTube that night. And so here I am, I'm trudging up the steps, and I walk into the football office, and Coach Carroll just happens to be standing right there with a big old grin on his face. And I was like, okay, good joke, Coach, nice one. And he's like, no, you can catch the ball, you can run fast, we want you on the team. Are you in? So there in that moment, I go from student newspaper reporter who was just weeks from graduating to all of a sudden a wide receiver on the number one football team in the country. This was crazy. So I go and I get my helmet and my pads, and I hadn't played football in 10 years, so I didn't know which was front and back on the pads. They hand me a playbook, and I mean, I'd played Madden before, but this playbook was far different than playing video games. I was a fish out of water. I'm there at practice for the first day, and I get popped right in the jaw. I'm lying there on the ground seeing stars, but I survived. So I figured, okay, I think I can do this. This will be really cool. Day after day goes by, week after week goes by, and I'm starting to gain some weight. I'm working out a lot and drinking a lot of protein shakes and going to Taco Bell every night. And starting to put some weight on, starting to understand the playbook. I applied all my academic skills to studying football plays, and it was starting to pay off. And it was really exciting. And I was starting to take hold of this new life that I was given out of nowhere. And about a month into spring practice, I'm out blocking a cornerback on a play, and I get my arm caught in his pad, and a freak thing happens where he rolls over me, and I'm all of a sudden lying on my back on the field, and my shoulder was dislocated. The doctors rush out and they pop it in. They send me to the hospital there on campus, and I have to get x-rays, MRIs, and they say you need emergency reconstructive surgery. You got to get surgery as soon as possible because your shoulder is just obliterated. So there in that moment, I go from living this new life, this new exciting life, to all of a sudden it gets ripped from my hands just like that. The doctor said I had 9 months of recovery ahead of me. And I was a senior, so I only had that one season to play, and 9 months from that point was after the season was over. So I was devastated. I was crushed because I'd started to live into this new life, and all of a sudden it evaporated. So for some reason, I decided I was going to go through the surgery and just rehab and see how fast I could get back. Maybe I could get back faster than 9 months. Get through the surgery and start the rehab process, and 4.5 months later, I'm in my checkup with the doctors. And they say, we've never seen anything like this. We can't even believe this is happening, but you're actually fully healthy. You're able to return to the football field. So in half the time they originally said, there I was back on the football field practicing day in and day out. Miraculous healing. And then all of a sudden I'm out suiting up on the scout team and back to donning my helmet and my pads for practice, and I was so content just suiting up and running out of the tunnel for home games and just being a part of it. I didn't really care if I got into a game or not because there were 100 guys on the team and 99 guys deserved to play. One guy did not. I did not deserve to be there. On that team alone, there were 54 guys that would go on and play in the NFL. So I had no chance of playing in a game, and I was content just to be a part of it, just to be a teammate, just to enjoy running out of the tunnel and enjoy that whole experience. But I was kind of alone in that thought because there was a group of students that started a campaign called Get Ben In. And they wanted to see just the average Joe student get into a game. And so they made t-shirts and they made posters and they started chants in the student section, Get Ben In. And trust me, it was really awkward because the student section's chanting my name, and there's all these future NFL stars on the roster, and the student section's not chanting their names. So it was pretty funky for those last couple games of the year. But it was really cool that a bunch of students kind of rallied, and this story became bigger than me. And it became an inspiration to a lot of people, and I was just so fortunate to be a part of it. But we had made it through that whole season, and we made it to our last home game of the year, and I hadn't gotten in a game yet. Fox Sports did a little documentary. We're going to show a 3-minute clip here that kind of tells the rest of the story from here, so enjoy this.
Arch rival Notre Dame was USC's final opponent of the year and Ben's last chance to play for the Trojans.
I got up in the morning at the hotel and was watching the television, and I saw a big sign and it said, "Get Ben in," with a big photo of Ben on it. I'm thinking, this is remarkable.
It was so cool how people rallied behind me.
92,000 people, and all very feverish because it was the Notre Dame game. It was spine-tingling.
If I could have just taken that as my last seat memory, that would have been the best thing ever. This was my last chance. It was senior night at the Coliseum.
We were asked as a group of parents to come out on the field and form a gauntlet for the players to run through. And of course, the first name they mentioned,
Malcolmson!
he comes running through like Traveler the horse, and he ran through the gauntlet. I look up on the Jumbotron, and there it is. It says Ben Malcolmson from Highland Park, Texas. And I went, oh my gosh. Many people tell me I'd give my left arm to have that experience. And I go, wow, it really is that big a deal.
The Notre Dame game couldn't have been a more storied way to end.
After all, Notre Dame's Rudy Rudiger's walk-on story had inspired a feature film, Rudy.
Almost like it was divine intervention.
We were up 2 scores, and I remember that Notre Dame had tried to onside kick the ball.
Trojans got it. They're going to take off for the end zone, and here comes Brian Cushing. Touchdown!
The score then got to a point where there was a sufficient spread that the coaches felt comfortable in putting Ben in the game.
Finally, 8 months of sweat, pain, and dedication paid off for Ben Malcolmson.
It was an out-of-body experience for sure. Coach said, "Benny, you're in."
We saw him running out there, and we said, oh my gosh, he's actually going to get into the game.
It was just an awesome experience. I definitely went nuts.
Even though it was only like 10 seconds of me on the field on that play, it meant so much to me for all the work that I put in, all the challenges I'd overcome, but also for the people who had started to support me. And it was just not only my friends, it was so many people around campus, people in class, people I didn't even know.
What a remarkable experience. And I think that's what Ben kind of lived for.
Though he was only on the field for one play, Ben accomplished something few could ever imagine.
That dream that everyone has to what would it be like to be out there and be a part of it, he got to live it.
For Ben to be able to do that was something that I think really proved to him that I can do something extraordinary in my life.
It is very special for these guys to be able to hang in this program. It's a very unique program, and that's a lifelong memory for those guys to make it through because of their will and their toughness and their desire and the way they dream. It's a beautiful thing sometimes.
It's just surreal. It was unbelievable. It seems like only stuff that happens in movies. It's one of the highest moments of my life, without a doubt.
I know you guys are clapping for my dad's cameo appearance there, so yeah, that story itself screams of God. Only God could take a scrawny little journalism student and place him on the #1 college football team in the country. But the coolest thing about what God was up to all along was that he was doing things that I couldn't even see with my own eyes in those moments. And as I say that, I know that resonates with many of you in here today, that God's at work in your life, whether you can see it or not. Maybe you can look back and see the ways that God had been working in your life. But as we go forward, as I finish the rest of this story, I want you to think about those moments in your life where it's been easy to question, is God really at work? Is God really showing up here? Because for me, The moment I made the team, I had this deep sense that God had placed me there for a reason, that I was there for a purpose. Because if they needed another football player, there were many other worthy candidates, but I felt just this overwhelming sense that God had me on that team for a reason. And so I was pressing into it from day one. I couldn't wait to see why God had placed me on that team. About a month into being on the team, I get an idea that I'll start a Bible study for the team. And so I prepared a Bible study lesson. I got a room ready. I told all my teammates. I passed out flyers, and this is why God had me on the team. The time comes for our first Bible study, and no one showed up. I was so discouraged. I was defeated. I was doubting, do I really have a purpose here? Because I tried this Bible study, and it came back empty. So then it took me a little while to get through that discouragement, and about a month or so later, I get another idea. I'll start a prayer group for the team. We'll gather together, we'll pray together before every game. So I made flyers, I told all my teammates, I got a room ready, and the time comes for our first prayer meeting. No one showed up. So now I'm twice as discouraged, twice as defeated, and questioning my purpose even more. God, why did you put me on this team if all I'm doing is failing? So then I was reading a couple weeks later in Matthew 5, and it says, "Let your light shine before men." And in that moment, I slammed the Bible shut, and I was so excited because that was my purpose. That God put me on that team to be a light. All those things I was trying to do didn't matter as much as who I was supposed to be. And so I just needed to be a light. And so I focused for the next many weeks on just trying to be a light, trying to be a great teammate, trying to love the people around me. And maybe that'll lead to some really great conversation, and maybe I'll get to share the gospel with some teammates. Maybe these friendships will lead to something great. But after weeks and weeks of trying to develop deeper friendships, trying to be a light to my teammates, I was coming up empty once again. I was seeing no fruit to my labor. And so there I am, discouraged even more, defeated even more, and doubting my purpose even more. And I know that many, if not all of you, have been in those shoes too. That you feel like you're called to something, that you feel like you have a purpose somewhere, but all you see is failure. I know that resonates with many of you here today. So at this point, we're towards the end of the season, and I was running out of time. I only had that 1 year to play. And I was reading in Isaiah 55 one morning, and it says, "If his word goes out, it will not return empty." And so here I was doing all these things that were coming up empty, and here was my answer. That if his word goes out, it will not return empty. And so I had this idea, well, I'll put his word out there. I will put his literal word out there, and it won't come back empty. God is always faithful to his promises. He is always true to his word. And so he was going to come up here. And so I called my grandfather. He worked for the Gideons organization. It's the group that puts Bibles in hotel rooms and passes out Bibles for free all over the world. Shared my idea with him, and then 2 weeks later, I get a box of 100 Bibles on my doorstep. I figured, okay, this is it. This is my purpose. This is why God had me on this team. And so I typed up a little red note. It says, "A Christmas gift for you, the greatest present you will ever receive, Jesus Christ. Merry Christmas." Placed a red note inside every Bible, and at 11 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve, I went into the locker room and placed one Bible in every one of my teammates' lockers. I wanted to do this one completely anonymous. I was tired of being the guy that was out there trying to have an impact, the Christian guy out there, and so this was going to be totally under the radar. This was going to be completely anonymous. I didn't even want the janitors to see, so that's why I went middle of the night on Christmas Eve. We had Christmas Day off, and on the 26th of December, I was so excited to see my purpose on that team come to fruition. God had brought me through all those failures, and it was to get to this moment, to be able to place Bibles in all my teammates' lockers so that his word would not come back empty. And so my mind was just going wild. I mean, I was a zealous 21-year-old college student, so I was fully expecting gold light to emanate from the locker room as I walked up, like the Hallelujah chorus to be sung by my teammates, just like revival to break out as I walked into the locker room. And I pull the door to the locker room on the morning of the 26th of December, and I walk in, and there's Bibles just shredded all over the floor. pages ripped up. You couldn't even see the carpet because all you could see were shredded pages of Bibles everywhere. So you can imagine my feelings in those moments. If I had felt discouraged before, this took it to a whole new level. I was absolutely crushed. Not only had I tried and failed to find my purpose yet again, but now I'm out of time. Our last game of the year, the Rose Bowl, was just days away. I had totally missed God's purpose for me on that team. So we go through that week and we play in the game, and it was an awesome experience from a football perspective. We won the game, it was fun, it was exciting, but I felt this hole in my heart that I'd missed my reason for being on that team. A few days after the game, I'm at home and I get a phone call from a teammate saying, "Hey, did you hear about Mario?" Mario was our kicker on the team. He was one of my best friends on the team, record-setting kicker, one of the most gregarious personalities ever. He was kind of the mayor of the team. And I was like, "No, what happened to Mario?" And he's like, "Oh no, you didn't hear. Mario died last night. 21 years old, one of my closest friends, had mysteriously passed away just a few days after our last game together." So not only was I carrying this discouragement and defeat, but now here I'm dealing with grief of losing a friend and a teammate at 21. A few days later, we go to his funeral together as a team, and we're sitting stuffed in pews, and right as his casket passes by, down the center aisle, I look up from my tears, and I see on top of the casket was the Bible with the red note sticking out of it, just resting on top of his casket. And I had no idea what it meant, but it just felt like God's personal comforting touch for me in those moments. Just like, it was like God had been like, "I see you. I saw what you did." And it gave me immense comfort and ability to move through that grief and press forward in life. And for the next 3 years, I ended up working at USC for the football team there and worked for Coach Carroll there. And when he took the job with the Seattle Seahawks in 2010, he asked me to come up to Seattle with him. And I moved up to Seattle shortly after he took the job, and it was a tough move because I didn't know anyone in Seattle except for Coach Carroll, and I needed some friends. I needed people to hang out with. So I was like the lonely, desperate guy. Like meet and greet time during church was like my favorite time of the week. Like if the barista at Starbucks was nice, I was like, oh, maybe they'll be my friend, you know? Like I was just so lonely and desperate. And I run across this really outgoing guy who starts telling me about this organization called Young Life. It was a high school mentorship program, and they needed volunteer leaders, people in their 20s. They just needed people to come alongside these high school students. And so I was like, I've never heard of this organization before, and whatever it is, I'm in because I need something to do with my time. And so I show up at this informational meeting for future leaders, and I'm excited to learn about what this is all about. And right as it begins, a former teammate of mine walks through the doors. His name was Taylor. He was our punter on the team, and I hadn't seen him since Mario's funeral 4 years earlier, 1,000 miles away from where we were now. So our worlds are kind of rocked. We're like, okay, we need to figure out what's going on here. This is crazy. We remove ourselves from this meeting, and we're catching up. And I'm like, Taylor, what the heck are you doing here? And he's like, what are you doing here? And we're catching up, and Taylor starts telling me that his life had totally turned around in the last few years. I'm like, well, what happened? He's like, do you remember the last week we were on the team together? There were Bibles in all of our lockers. Now, I hadn't thought about this Bible with the red note sticking out. I hadn't thought about these Bibles really since seeing it on top of Mario's casket. Because these Bibles symbolize discouragement, defeat, and death. And so when he said that, my first reaction was just play dumb. And I was like, yeah, I kind of remember those, not really sure, and don't really remember those too well. And he starts telling me that he grew up going to church, he grew up going to youth group, and when he went to college, he just decided he was going to live life on his own terms, kind of turn from the faith and do his own thing. And so he sees a Bible in his locker that morning, and he's kind of confused. Like, what is this doing here? I don't need this. And he throws it in the back of his locker. And he's going out to the practice field that morning. He's pushing the door to go out, and he hears a voice in the back corner of the locker room. And he turns around, thinking he was the last one in there, and there's this guy sitting in his locker going, what is this? And it's Mario, our kicker, thumbing through the Bible, going, what is this? And Taylor being our punter and Mario being our kicker, they were best of friends. They spent all their time together. So Taylor screams across the locker room as he's pushing the door to go out to the practice field, Mario, have you never seen a Bible before? And Mario's like, no, what am I supposed to do with this thing? So for some reason, Taylor said that he set down his helmet and his pads there at the doorstep, turned around, walked back, and sat down next to Mario, and for the next 45 minutes took him through the Bible. Every word written in red are the words of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Savior of the world, the one who came to die, to take on your sins, to make you right with God, to give you a relationship with God now and forever. Now keep in mind, Taylor hadn't gone to church in 4 years. He hadn't picked up a Bible himself in 4 years. He hadn't been walking with God in 4 years. But all those seeds that were planted in his life as a kid came out bearing fruit in that moment. And Mario's soaking it up. He can't get enough. Taylor said for the rest of that week, Mario couldn't put the Bible down. Every spare moment he had, every few minutes between practice and meetings, Mario was reading the Bible or asking Taylor questions, tell me more, tell me more. A few days before the game, just a few days after he picked up a Bible for the first time in his life, Taylor said that Mario had begun a relationship with God in a way that he had never seen before. And Taylor obviously has a front row seat to all this. And he himself is confused. He doesn't know where he stands on all this faith stuff. And he's watching his best friend start walking with God. And just a few days later, Taylor gets the same phone call I did. Hey, did you hear about Mario? Mario died last night. And in those moments, Taylor saw God's hand at work in Mario's life in his final days on earth. He saw God's love and his power and his desire to have a relationship for Mario. And in those moments that he got the phone call, that same phone call I did, Taylor recommitted his life to Jesus, turned his life back over to God. And he's like, God is so real. He's so powerful. He's so good. And he's telling me this 4 years later. And he says, ever since then, my life has never been the same. God is so real, and I want to tell more people about it. And I'm like, Taylor, that's the craziest story I've ever heard. And it's even crazier because I was the one that put the Bible in the locker, and I thought I was a total failure all along. We gave each other a huge hug, and this is our God. This is what God wants to do through each and every one of us, that he has an incredible purpose for all of us. No matter where you're at in life, no matter what your life has been like previously, no matter where you're at now, God has an amazing purpose for you. Now there's a verse in the back of the Old Testament. It's Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5. And it says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am doing something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. Now, if God would have told me ahead of time, hey, you're going to try out for the football team, you're going to make it, you're going to overcome injury, you're going to try to find your purpose on that team, and it's going to look like you're failing left and right. Then you're going to find out 4 years later, 1,000 miles from the last place you saw this guy, that God really did have a purpose all along, that he used a Bible to change one man's life just in his final days on earth, to start a relationship with God in an entirely new way that he'd ever experienced before. And then I'm going to find out about it 4 years later. If God would have told me this before all this story happened, I wouldn't have believed it. This is too big, too great. And if he can do it for me, he can do it for you. Our God is no respecter of persons. He wants to do this in and through each and every person. No matter what your life has looked like in the past, no matter where you're at now, God wants to do things in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. Now, this is a story of nudges and steps. I felt a nudge to try to impact my teammates, and I took steps to do that. Taylor felt a nudge that morning as he's pushing the door, got to the football field, to turn around and share something with his teammate. Mario felt a nudge that morning to pick up a Bible for the first time in his life and find out what this God was all about. What are the nudges you're feeling right now? I know God wants to nudge you right now to take a step towards your utterly amazing purpose that you have in your life. And all it takes is just listening to one little nudge and taking one little step. And whether you see results or not right here in this moment, to trust and to know that God is at work in your life, whether you see it or not. So look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For God is doing something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. Thank you all. God bless you.